As you can see, geographical indication, just a very brief overview, a focus on the European Union system, some hints about Italy, specifically in terms of wines. And then if we have time also, I have prepared a couple of slides on alcoholic beverages, specifically beer and spirits. I'm gonna go quite fast at the very beginning because 10 minutes goes quite fast. So GI in a nutshell, just 3 main points that are necessary in order to make sense of what I'm going to say. Definitely geographical indications signal a turn to local. What does it mean? Basically that we now pay more attention to the local production, the local relationships happening, the local ecologies, the local ecosystems, right? And this is quite important, specifically in the age of globalization. This is the interesting things, because that's a very interesting site of conflict in that sense. Second point about geographical indication, as you have learned, it relies on the notion of terroir. Specifically for the European Union, this is a quite important concept. You know that it comes from the French viticulture. It's basically the triangulation, the relationships between the place understood as the soil, the physical features of a place, the human intervention, and then the grape variety, right? So it's really this intermingling of different factors. And the point is definitely the importance of the place of origin. Last thing about geographical indication is that there are historical and cultural factors. This is very true for the European, for Europe and the European Union, because it has adopted the concept of terroir in order to develop its complicated GI system. So historically speaking, somehow the notion of the place of origin was born in France. I have prepared this table. I'm not going into each of them, of course, just to give you, right, this sense of the historical review, the fact that we've got notions in the literature since the Roman and the Greek empires about the importance of some Italian wine or Greek wines and so on. France, again, in the literature, you will find a lot of information about the cheese or the chicken in specific part of France. But the most important thing that you should get out of this table is the fact that not only the notion of the place of origin is important, but since the 1700s, the European countries have provided a legal protection. So basically, they invented a structure in order to protect the different products, okay, in recognition of the importance of the place of origin. Now, I have highlighted in red on the bottom the last two, because these are the two most important pieces of legislation for the European Union. 1992, the European Economic Community Council regulation on the protection of geographical indication, and more recently, and that was, quite important because it was the first attempt to harmonize throughout Europe the idea of geographical indication. And more recently, 2012, the birth of the EU quality schemes. Interesting about this is that these quality schemes are meant to protect the place of origin, but also the traditional methods. So now we have basically these two levels, definitely geographical places, but also methodology, know-how, the role of people. So how is this in practical terms? Well, as you can see here in this slide, on the left side, you have the logo, right? So the different labels that can be put on the product if the product has been accorded this legal protection. Now, the main typology of the GI system are basically these next one that I'm going to mention. The first one, the red label PDO, so protected designation of origin, is these are different levels. This is the stricter. This is really related to the geographical area. So it means that the ingredients, the label, the know-how, the production have to happen in a very specific place. So very strict rules. Let's imagine Champagne, right? So this area north of Paris, 100 kilometers northeast, only specific grape varieties, only following a specific methods of production, and following some times and regulations and so on. The second level of protection established by the European Union, is the PGI, so Protected Geographical Indication. It's basically like the previous one, but it's less stringent. So it allows also ingredients to originate outside of the designated area. What does it mean? It means that at least a part of the ingredient can come also from, might be some neighbor regions. Let's imagine the French cheese, such as Brie de Mer. Part of the milk can come also from neighboring regions, as I said. Third level of protection in the European Union system, TSG, Traditional Specialties Guarantees. This is not referring specifically to an area of production, but it refers to the use of traditional ingredients and the production know-how. Okay, so here we are moving a little bit outside of the notion of just the place. An example here is the Gueuze beer, typical of Belgium, originally from Brussels. Now it can be produced everywhere, but the most important thing that is protected is the way it is produced. Then very lesser levels, we also have the GI, Geographical Indication for spirit drinks and aromatized wines, but as I said, less important, and also protections for mountain products, outermost regions, and also some voluntary certification schemes. Now, does this system work? Yes, and how does it work? Well, it can be individual producers or more often producer groups who have to gather all the information in terms of the product specification, geographical area, historical notions, if these are applicable, in order to register the name of a product. Okay, altogether. They have to forward this documentation to the national authorities, and the national authorities have a first scrutiny. If the conditions are there in order to register the product, then the national authorities will forward it to the European Commission. Now, the European Commission receives these and they have a limited time to respond. They can say yes or they can say no, right? And if they say yes, of course, all the process gets studied in order to follow the regulations, in order to apply all the different rules. Now, in recognition of the fact that the EU are a dynamic concept, then a EU can be registered, a EU GI can be registered, but it can also be cancelled. And this is exactly because the places and the methods can change. Last point that I want to highlight is that also non-EU products can be registered in the EU archives via national authorities, but this can happen only if there are some reciprocal agreements with the EU in order to have a mutual protection of such names. So basically, both countries, both places have a mutual recognition. Now, in practical terms, right? How does it work? Does it work, first of all? Yes, it works, and in a quite good way. In fact, as you can see here, on the basis of the report commissioned by the European Union in 2020, as per 2020, we have more than 3,300 GIs and TSGs, so traditional specialties guarantees, registered, and this amounts to almost 75 billion euros, right? And this is representing the 7% of the total sales of the European Union. Now, of these, the wines and spirit and drinks sector represent more than half of the GIs in terms of names registered, but also in terms of volume and value. And this is one of the things exactly that I'm going to focus on in the next slides. Last point about this slide here, Italy and France are the two countries that have the highest number of products registered. And this is definitely a recognition of the historical overview that I have mentioned before. Italy has the highest number for wine, and France instead has the highest number for foodstuff. Now, how does this concept apply specifically to wine? Focus now, we are moving into wine. Well, we have, let's imagine a pyramid, right, in order to have a representation. So at the bottom, as you can see here, generic wines and varietal wines. What does it mean? It means that these are wines that can be produced anywhere in the EU, and there are just very simple rules in terms of the labeling, in terms of what can be put on the label. things are getting more interesting, as we have seen in terms of value and also volume, when it comes to the top part of this pyramid, right? So for the PDO, for the PGI and the PDO. So the PGI, as we have seen, a specific territory, and we have some specific and precise instructions in terms of how a wine can be produced, the grape varieties allowed, the type of labeling, certifications, and so on. And for the PDO, really the top here in this pyramid, these instructions, these regulations are stricter. How does this European system is applied in Italy? Well, here is the thing, right? So imagining again the same pyramid, we had, of course, to receive the same legislation, but it has to be adapted, right? So we had in Italy legislation, specific legislation starting in 1963, and then we had some updates. So these basic generic wines are basically in the Italian system represented by the VDT, so the table wines. And then the middle layer here, PGI, is represented by what in Italy we call IGT, so typical geographical indication. But the interesting thing happens at the top here. So the PDO is represented by two different types of geographical indication, DOC and DOCG. So basically controlled origin, and instead the top here, controlled and guaranteed origins. What does this mean? Well, now, in terms of the GIs, this is a quite important thing, right? So it means that really we got a lot out of this in terms of value and in terms of volumes. But when it comes to the DOC and DOCG, we have very specific authorized grape varieties, very specific viticulture and vinification practices, very specific organoleptic features that have to be respected, and also labeling instructions. For the DOCG, this is even stricter. It works. It works because, as you can see, in terms of volume and also value, definitely this system is rewarding, right? In terms of production, this is referring to 2017, we got 24 million hectoliters of production amounting to almost 9 billion euros. Usually we compete with France in that sense, which is another country with a very difficult legislation in that sense. And the main GI producing regions, okay, wine is produced throughout all Italy, but in terms of the geographical indication, definitely the northern regions are a bit more important. Friuli, Venezia Giulia, Piedmont, Tuscany, and Veneto. Veneto is famous, I guess, also for the highlight case study of Prosecco. And much of the production is exported. There are a couple of things that I want to highlight about this system, because as per 2020, the number of DOC, so this level, was 331. Okay, so the geographical indications under DOC were 331. And the top one, 76 DOCG registered. Notion about the production, how it works in order to register, okay, to move from here to this. In order to get a DOC, the producers have to have registered their wines for the IGT for at least 5 years, okay? So 5 years means that producers can then upgrade to DOC. And if then they want to upgrade to DOCG, they have to wait at least 7 years. And there are really a lot of restrictions in that sense. And in order to get to the top level, beyond the other regulations that I mentioned, there are also some stricter analysis and also a panel of tasting composed by different experts, right? So in recognition of the different traditions. Now, these numbers that I mentioned here, 376, mean extreme fragmentation. And this is a quite problematic thing. Why? Because it is already quite difficult for the Italian consumers to not only remember, but simply know the different geographical indication pertaining to the different regions, because sometimes it's a matter of just few kilometers of distance one from another. This extreme fragmentation, of course, in terms of the international markets is even more problematic, right? Because only the most famous can get the best market reward. Second point about this system is that this pyramid does not necessarily reflect a higher market quality. In fact, although the regulations are strict, and it is true that there are a lot of controls in order to get the certification on the market and international market even more, we have seen a lot of examples of simple IGT wines. So it means that the producers want to escape, right? So the strict regulations in order to be able to freely produce the wine that they might have in mind. I'm not talking about a huge number of producers, but it is quite emblematic, right, in order to understand how this system works. You have probably heard about the famous Super Tuscan, and definitely you might have an idea about that.